It was the day when everything was supposed to be perfect. The sun shone brightly over the lush grounds of the Thompson estate, nestled on the outskirts of a quiet town in upstate New York. Guests were milling around the well-manicured garden, sipping champagne and chatting excitedly. At the center of it all stood Catherine, a stunning bride, her wedding dress glistening in the sunlight. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Catherine had fallen in love with a man named Thomas Grant. He was everything she had ever wanted: handsome, successful, charming, and kind. Catherine was a woman who had been through many struggles in her life. She had seen the pain of heartbreak before, but Thomas had shown her a love so pure, so perfect, that it felt like a dream. For months, their courtship had been a whirlwind of romance, late-night talks, and promises of forever. When Thomas proposed, Catherine didn't hesitate for a second. He was the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. What she didn't know, however, was that Thomas had a secret. It was one that could tear apart everything they had built together. Catherine had no idea what lay beneath the surface of her soon-to-be husband's past, but that would all change today, in the most tragic and shocking way imaginable. As the ceremony began, Catherine felt a flutter in her chest. Her father walked her down the aisle, and she smiled at Thomas, who stood at the altar waiting for her. He smiled back, a look of adoration in his eyes. Catherine felt like the luckiest woman alive. But what she didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a nightmare. The reception that followed was a grand affair. The ballroom of the estate was filled with laughter and music, and the newlyweds danced in the center of the room, basking in the glow of their happiness. But even as they twirled across the dance floor, a darkness was lurking in the background. It was only a matter of time before Catherine's world came crashing down. Later that night, as the guests began to leave, Catherine found herself alone in one of the many rooms of the estate. She was exhausted but still buzzing with excitement from the day's events. Thomas had gone to check on a few last-minute details, so Catherine decided to take a moment for herself. It was then that the door opened, and in walked a woman Catherine had never met before. She was tall, with dark hair and sharp features. She wore a confident expression, but her eyes were filled with something else, something Catherine couldn't quite place. The woman introduced herself as Sarah, and Catherine's heart sank when she saw the familiar glint in Sarah's eyes. It was the look of someone who had a history with Thomas, someone who knew him intimately. "I need to speak with you," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. Catherine was taken aback. She had no idea who this woman was or what she wanted, but something about her presence made Catherine uneasy. "About what?" Catherine asked, her voice shaky. "About Thomas," Sarah replied, her tone darkening. "There's something you don't know about him." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea what Sarah was talking about, but the look in her eyes told her that this conversation was about to take a very dangerous turn. "I don't understand," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you saying?" Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. "Thomas isn't who you think he is. He's the father of my 3 children." Catherine's heart stopped. She stared at Sarah, unable to process the words. It was like the ground beneath her feet had just vanished. How could this be possible? Catherine had known Thomas for months, years even, and she had never once heard him mention a past like this. The woman standing in front of her was claiming that Thomas was the father of her children, and not just any children, 3 of them. Catherine felt the world spin around her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her mind raced to make sense of this information, but everything was suddenly blurry, distorted. It was impossible. But Sarah's words rang in her ears over and over again. Thomas had a family, one that Catherine knew nothing about. And the worst part? Catherine was married to him now. The weight of the revelation hit her like a ton of bricks. She felt betrayed, deceived, humiliated. How could Thomas have kept something so huge from her? "Why are you telling me this?" Catherine finally managed to ask, her voice shaking. Sarah looked at her with a mixture of pity and resolve. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Thomas has been lying to you, and you need to be careful. There's more to this story than you're aware of. Much more." Before Catherine could ask any more questions, Sarah turned and walked out of the room, leaving Catherine standing there, stunned, alone, and on the edge of a deep, dark abyss. Catherine's hands trembled as she held on to the edges of the window frame, staring out at the sprawling estate in front of her. The lush gardens, the marble fountain, the glowing lights, everything that had once seemed so perfect now felt cold and distant. She had married Thomas Grant under the illusion that they were starting a new chapter of their lives together, but now it all seemed like a lie. She had always believed in love, in the promises that came with it. But now in the quiet of the room, with Sarah's words still echoing in her mind, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that she was trapped in a web of deceit. Thomas had been a mystery to her, even after their months of courtship. He was charming, yes. He was attentive, thoughtful, and endlessly kind. But there were moments, small moments, that made Catherine wonder if she truly knew him at all. He had always been a bit guarded when it came to talking about his past. He never mentioned his family, his childhood, or his life before they had met. It hadn't seemed like much of an issue at first. After all, who didn't have a complicated past? But now, with Sarah's revelation hanging heavily in the air, Catherine couldn't help but wonder if Thomas had been hiding far more than just a few details. What kind of man was he, really? How could he have kept something so significant from her? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. She spun around to see Thomas standing in the doorway, a look of concern on his face. He was dressed in a crisp tuxedo, but something in his posture made him look smaller, more vulnerable than usual. "Catherine?" His voice was soft, hesitant. "Is everything all right?" Catherine didn't answer right away. She stood there, her mind racing, trying to figure out how to confront him. She didn't want to accuse him without knowing the full truth. But how could she let this go? Sarah's words lingered in her mind like a poisonous fog. 3 children. How could he have kept that from her? What kind of person hid something like that? "I need to know the truth, Thomas," she said finally, her voice steady but edged with emotion. "About Sarah, about her children." Thomas's face paled, and for a moment, Catherine could see the faintest flicker of panic in his eyes. But he quickly masked it, replacing the look with a forced calmness. "Catherine, he started, but Catherine cut him off. "No," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I need to hear it from you. I need to know what's going on." He sighed, rubbing his forehead as though trying to find the right words. Catherine's heart pounded in her chest. She could see the hesitation in his eyes, the internal struggle. He wasn't sure how to explain it to her, or maybe he was afraid of losing her if he told her everything. Finally he spoke, his voice tight and weary. "Sarah she's my ex-wife, the mother of my 3 children. I didn't want to tell you about them because, well, it's complicated." Catherine felt her stomach churn. "Complicated," she repeated. "How is it complicated, Thomas?" He looked away, his gaze drifting toward the floor. "We had an open marriage, Catherine, and things didn't end well. After we divorced, I tried to put it all behind me, to move on. I didn't want to bring up my past to you because I thought we could start fresh without all the baggage. But Sarah, she never really let go. And now she's threatening me. Threatening you." Catherine's voice was a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "With what?" He hesitated before answering. "She wants money. I've been paying her alimony for years, but now she wants more. She's using the kids as leverage, saying I've neglected them, that I've been a bad father. She's trying to ruin me." Catherine's mind was spinning. So Thomas wasn't lying about the children. He had a history with Sarah, one that he clearly hadn't wanted to revisit. But the fact that Sarah was threatening him, using his past against him, added another layer of complexity to the situation. Was this really about money, or was there something else going on? Catherine wasn't sure. "Why didn't you tell me all of this before?" Catherine asked, her voice a little softer now. "I need to know, Thomas. I thought we were building something real together." "I know," he said quietly, walking toward her and placing a hand on her shoulder. "I never meant to hurt you, Catherine. I just didn't want you to feel like you were getting involved in all of this drama. I thought we could have our own life, without the past weighing us down." Catherine felt a wave of anger rise within her. He had kept so much from her, thinking she couldn't handle it. He had painted a perfect picture, one that didn't include his messy, complicated past. Catherine felt betrayed, and worse, she felt like she had been living in a fantasy. "And now what?" Catherine asked. "Are you telling me that you're still involved with Sarah? That she's still controlling your life?" Days passed, but the unsettling conversation between Catherine and Thomas lingered in the back of her mind like an unwelcome shadow. The honeymoon period of their marriage was now replaced with doubt, confusion, and a creeping sense of betrayal. Catherine had always trusted Thomas, had placed her faith in him as a man who would be her partner, her equal. But now every moment felt like a lie, and every conversation with him felt like a performance. The truth, whatever it was, had only cracked the surface. Catherine had tried to push her suspicions aside. She had believed Thomas when he assured her that his past with Sarah was over, that he was done with her. But something didn't feel right. Catherine knew that people didn't just walk away from their past so easily, especially when there were children involved. The fact that Sarah had come to her so abruptly, her words sharp and filled with warning, kept playing over and over in Catherine's head. There was more to this story. She was sure of it. The next few days were tense between them. Thomas continued to assure her that everything would be fine, but Catherine could sense his unease. He seemed distant, avoiding her gaze when they spoke, and he was often on the phone in private, always lowering his voice when she entered the room. She tried to ignore it, to convince herself that she was overthinking, but the more she watched him, the more she felt like he was slipping away from her. It was during one of these moments of doubt that Catherine decided to take matters into her own hands. She wasn't sure how, but she knew she had to dig deeper to find out who Thomas really was. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about understanding the man she had married. One evening, when Thomas was out running errands, Catherine sat down at the desk in their study. She opened his laptop, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. She had never snooped on him before. They had a trusting relationship, one built on mutual respect and honesty. But now trust felt like a fragile thing, easily shattered by the smallest crack. The laptop screen blinked to life, and Catherine quickly navigated to Thomas's email inbox. At first, she felt a pang of guilt for invading his privacy, but she brushed it aside. She needed answers. She had to know if he had been hiding something bigger than she could imagine. She scrolled through the emails looking for anything suspicious. Most of them were routine, work-related, bills, advertisements. But then one email caught her eye. It was from Sarah, sent just 2 days before the wedding. The subject line read, "We need to talk. Urgent." Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she clicked on the email. The contents were brief but chilling. "Thomas, you promised me you would take care of this. The kids deserve more than just your empty promises. You're still their father, no matter how much you pretend otherwise. If you don't fix this, I will make sure everyone knows the truth about you. This isn't over." The words hit Catherine like a slap in the face. The tone was cold, threatening, and full of malice. Sarah wasn't just a woman scorned. She was holding something over Thomas. Something that could ruin him. Something that was far more dangerous than she had initially realized. Catherine sat back in the chair, her mind racing. The truth about you. What did that mean? What was Sarah threatening to expose? She continued reading, searching for any clues that might shed light on what Sarah was alluding to. But the email didn't offer any more answers. It was a cryptic warning, nothing more. Catherine's fingers hovered over the keyboard, torn between confronting Thomas with what she had found or digging deeper into his past. She needed more information. She clicked on the Sent folder, hoping to find some responses that might offer more insight. There, buried beneath other mundane emails, she found a thread that stood out. It was a series of messages exchanged between Thomas and an unknown recipient. The last message was dated 6 months ago, and the subject was simply, "For the children." Catherine clicked it open, her heart pounding. The message read, "You're asking too much, Sarah. I can't do this anymore. The kids are fine. They have everything they need. But I can't keep pretending like everything is normal. You know what happened between us. You know what I did. If it gets out, it will destroy everything. I'm begging you. Please don't go public with it. I'll do anything." Catherine's hands shook as she read the words. Thomas had done something terrible, something that could ruin him, that could ruin their life together. What had he done? What was Sarah threatening to expose? Before she could process the full extent of what she had read, Catherine heard the sound of the front door creaking open. She quickly closed the laptop and pushed it aside, her heart racing in her chest. Catherine felt like the room was spinning around her. The words, "I had an affair," echoed in her mind, reverberating off the walls of the study. She stared at Thomas, trying to process what he had just said. It wasn't just a mistake, a momentary lapse. No, this was something far more devastating. He had an affair, and not just with anyone. It was with Sarah's sister. For a moment, everything around her went silent. Her chest tightened, and she struggled to breathe. The image of Thomas, the man she had married, the man she thought she knew, was crumbling before her eyes. He wasn't the man she had built a life with. He was a stranger, a man with secrets she could never have imagined. Catherine shook her head, trying to grasp the enormity of what he had just confessed. Why, why didn't you tell me about this? She asked, her voice strained, barely above a whisper. Thomas looked down at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. His hands were clenched at his sides, his posture stiff. He knew this moment had come, the moment when his hidden truth could no longer stay buried. I didn't want you to find out like this, he said, his voice rough with guilt. I never wanted you to know about my past with Sarah or her sister. I was ashamed. But you need to understand, Catherine, it's not what you think. It wasn't just an affair. It was a mistake, a huge life-altering mistake. But it's over. It's been over for years. I tried to put it behind me. I thought I could leave it all in the past. Catherine felt her stomach churn. She didn't know if she was more angry or heartbroken. He had kept this from her for so long, and now it seemed like the entire foundation of their relationship had been built on lies. He had kept this secret, this betrayal, not just from her, but from everyone. He had hidden it so well, pretending to be the perfect husband, while the truth festered in the shadows. How long was it going on? Catherine managed to ask, her voice cracking with emotion. How long were you involved with Sarah's sister? About a year, Thomas admitted, his voice barely audible. It started when I was still married to Sarah. Things were falling apart between us, and I don't know, I made some terrible choices. It was one of those things that seemed like a way out at the time. But it wasn't. It was wrong, and I regret it every day. Catherine's mind was reeling. A year, a full year of betrayal, of lies. And the woman he had chosen to betray Sarah with was her own sister. What kind of twisted web had he woven? But why is Sarah threatening you with this? Why is she using it to control you? Catherine asked, her voice rising with a mix of frustration and confusion. Thomas looked up at her, his face pale and drawn. Because she knows what happened. She found out about the affair. Not just that, but everything. The way it tore apart our marriage, the way it ruined our family. Sarah and I, our relationship was already rocky. But when she found out about the affair, it destroyed everything. She went to her sister, and they both agreed that I had to pay for what I did. Catherine's blood ran cold as the implications of Thomas's words sank in. So they're both holding this over your head, Sarah and her sister? Thomas nodded, his eyes haunted. Yes, Sarah was angry, but it was her sister who took it further. She demanded money, alimony, and more from me. She said if I didn't comply, she would go public with the whole story. She was threatening to ruin my reputation, to tell everyone about what I had done to Sarah and her. The affair, it would destroy everything, Catherine. It could ruin my career. I couldn't let that happen. Catherine's mind raced. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a personal vendetta. There was something darker at play here. The two women, Sarah and her sister, were using Thomas's past as leverage to get what they wanted. But why did they want to destroy him so badly? What had driven them to take this extreme action? I've been paying them off for years, Thomas continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I've kept quiet, done everything they asked. But now it's like they want to drag everything out into the open. I thought marrying you would help me move on, but they keep coming after me, trying to pull me back into their mess. Catherine took a step back, trying to make sense of the pieces that Thomas had just laid out. This was more than just an affair. This was a web of manipulation, lies, and hidden truths. The affair was just the beginning, and the repercussions had spread far beyond what Catherine could have ever imagined. "But why didn't you tell me any of this before?" Catherine asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me about Sarah and her sister when we were getting married?" "I had the right to know." Thomas looked up at her, his eyes filled with remorse. "I was afraid, Catherine. I didn't want you to think less of me. I didn't want to lose you. I was trying to protect you from my past." Catherine couldn't sleep that night. Her mind buzzed with the weight of everything Thomas had confessed. He had lied. He had betrayed her. But the betrayal was only part of the story. As the hours dragged on in the silence of their empty, darkened house, the more Catherine realized that the truth was not as simple as Thomas had made it seem. She lay in their bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, replaying his words over and over again in her mind. "I had an affair. I was trying to protect you." He hadn't said much about what Sarah and her sister had been demanding beyond money. It was the last part that gnawed at her, the cryptic warning from Sarah. "There's more to this story than you know." Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that the affair was just a small part of something far more dangerous. She had to know more, even if it meant digging into a past that Thomas was desperate to hide. The next morning, Catherine decided she would confront Sarah. She had to hear the other side of the story, whatever Sarah had meant by her warning. Thomas had been evasive, and Catherine knew that if she wanted the truth, she would need to go straight to the source. She left the house early, without telling Thomas where she was going. It wasn't that she didn't trust him, but after last night, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something else. She had to know for herself, and she wasn't sure if she could rely on him anymore. Catherine arrived at Sarah's house just before noon. It was a large, imposing home, set back from the road by a long, winding driveway. She stood for a moment at the front door, taking a deep breath. She wasn't sure what kind of reception she would get, but she had come this far. The door opened just as she was about to knock. Sarah stood there, her sharp features softened by a look of mild surprise. She was dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, told Catherine that the woman before her was anything but ordinary. "I wasn't expecting you," Sarah said, her voice cool but not unfriendly. "But come in." Catherine stepped into the house, her mind racing. She had rehearsed what she was going to say, but now that she was here, she wasn't sure where to start. "I need to know the truth, Sarah," Catherine said, her voice firm but calm. "Thomas told me about the affair, but there's more. You said I should be careful. What did you mean by that?" Sarah didn't seem surprised. She simply closed the door behind Catherine and led her into a sitting room, gesturing for her to sit. "Well, well. So Thomas finally told you the truth, did he?" Sarah said, sitting across from Catherine with a slight smile. "I always knew this day would come. I didn't expect it to be so soon, but here we are." Catherine clenched her fists, trying to keep her composure. "What more is there, Sarah? What aren't you telling me?" Sarah studied her for a moment, a glint of amusement in her eyes. "You've been married to him for what, a few months now? And you're just finding out about the affair? That's amusing. He's been hiding his past for years, Catherine. But there's so much more than that." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What more could there be?" Sarah leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You think the affair was the worst of it? That's just the beginning. Thomas has always been a liar, a manipulator. The affair, that was just one of many secrets he's been hiding from you." Catherine felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "What are you talking about? You're saying there's more?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Oh yes, you've been played, Catherine. You think you're marrying this perfect, charming man, but what you don't know is that he's hiding things from you that could ruin his life, your life, and everything around you." Catherine's mind raced, and she couldn't suppress the tremor in her voice as she asked, "What kind of things, Sarah? What do you mean?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Catherine saw something darker in her expression. "You want to know the truth? Fine. Thomas isn't just hiding his affair with my sister. He's been involved in a much more serious crime, something that could put him behind bars if anyone found out. Catherine felt her breath catch in her throat. What crime? What are you talking about? Sarah leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. You see, Thomas isn't just a cheater. He's a liar, a thief, and worse, he's been involved in a cover-up for years. A dangerous one. He got mixed up with the wrong people when he was younger, people who deal with some pretty shady stuff. He's always tried to hide it, but now it's catching up to him. And that's why he's been paying me off all these years. He's afraid of what will happen if the truth gets out, afraid of what I could expose. Catherine's head was spinning. What do you mean, shady stuff? What kind of cover-up? Sarah gave a small, almost pitying smile. Catherine's feet felt heavy as she made her way back to the house, her mind racing. The weight of Sarah's words pressed down on her, a suffocating reality she couldn't ignore. She had believed that her marriage to Thomas was built on trust and love, but now everything seemed like a carefully constructed lie. Thomas wasn't just a man with a troubled past. He was a man with secrets so dark that it felt like the very foundation of their life together was made of sand. Sarah had painted a picture of Thomas as a man who had been involved in criminal dealings, a man who had lied and manipulated his way through life. Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was even worse than Sarah had made it sound. The more Catherine thought about it, the more she realized that Thomas had been hiding something far more sinister than just an affair. There was an entire web of deception around him, and it wasn't just about money or the past. It was about his survival, his need to keep his dark secrets buried. When Catherine had left Sarah's house, she had been filled with a sense of urgency. She had to confront Thomas, to demand the truth once and for all. But as she drove home, she began to question whether she even knew him anymore. Could she trust him? Could she stand by him, knowing what she now knew? She arrived at the house, the sky darkening with the onset of evening. Her heart pounded in her chest as she parked in the driveway. She couldn't put it off any longer. She needed to speak with Thomas, to hear his side of the story. The front door opened before she even had a chance to knock, and there stood Thomas, looking at her with a mix of confusion and concern. His eyes scanned her face, searching for something, but Catherine couldn't give him the answers he was looking for. "You're back early," Thomas said, his voice cautious. "How did it go?" Catherine didn't answer right away. She stepped past him into the house, feeling the tension in the air thickening with every step. She had no idea how this conversation would unfold, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. There were too many lies, too many unanswered questions. "Thomas, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. He closed the door behind her, locking it with a soft click. Catherine could feel the weight of the moment settle between them, the air crackling with unspoken words. Thomas looked at her, his brow furrowed, as if trying to read her expression. "What happened? Did Sarah dash?" "Don't even say her name," Catherine interrupted, her voice sharp. She wasn't sure if it was the shock of everything Sarah had told her or the overwhelming frustration of being kept in the dark for so long, but she couldn't let him dodge this anymore. "I spoke to Sarah. She told me everything." Thomas's face blanched, and for a moment, he looked as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He took a step back, his hands nervously wringing together. "Catherine, please. I can explain." "No." Catherine cut him off, her eyes hard. "No more lies. I need the truth. All of it." Thomas stood there in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. His jaw tightened as he tried to process what she was demanding. Catherine wasn't sure if he would open up, but she wasn't about to let him hide behind half-truths anymore. She had to know what kind of man he really was, and whether she could even stand to be married to him anymore. "Sarah told me about the affair, about your past," Catherine began, her voice cold. "But it's more than that, isn't it? There's more you've been hiding." Thomas swallowed, his eyes darting nervously to the side. "Catherine, No," she snapped. "Don't lie to me. I know there's more, Thomas. Sarah said you were involved in something criminal, that you've been hiding it for years. That's why she's been blackmailing you. That's why you've been paying her off. So what is it, Thomas? What are you involved in? What's so bad that you've kept it from me? For a long moment, Thomas stood frozen, as if weighing the consequences of telling her the truth. Catherine could see the internal struggle in his eyes. She wasn't sure if he was thinking of how to frame his confession or whether he was still considering how much he could get away with keeping hidden. But this time, Catherine wouldn't let him. "I'm waiting," she said firmly, her voice low and unwavering. Finally, with a deep breath, Thomas spoke. "It's true. I wasn't just involved in an affair. I, I got mixed up with the wrong people, Catherine. I made mistakes when I was younger, and I've been paying for them ever since." Catherine's heart raced. This was it, the moment of truth. She could feel the ground beneath her feet shift as she listened. "I was working with a man named Greg Lawson," Thomas continued, his voice low. "Greg, he runs a group that does things on the edge of the law." The doorbell rang again. It sounds sharp and insistent, cutting through the heavy silence of the room. Catherine's heart raced as she turned toward Thomas, her mind running wild with possibilities. Who could it be? Was it someone from Thomas's past? Was it Sarah coming to make good on her threats? Or worse, was it someone who had come to collect on the dangerous debts he had been hiding all these years? Thomas's face had gone ashen. He was frozen, staring at the door as though he could will the visitor to disappear. Catherine felt a cold chill spread across her skin. She could see the fear in his eyes, a fear that went beyond guilt. It was fear for his life. I don't know who it is," Thomas stammered, his voice weak. "Catherine, I swear to you, I didn't bring anyone here. I didn't expect this." Catherine's thoughts were a blur. She glanced once more at the door, then back at Thomas. In that moment, she realized something far more terrifying than the secrets Thomas had been hiding. The truth was out now, and whatever happened next, she was already caught in the web of lies and danger. She couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when everything was about to spiral out of control. The doorbell rang once more, this time followed by a loud knock. Catherine's stomach clenched. Her mind screamed for action, for answers. "Thomas," Catherine whispered urgently, "who is this? What is going on?" Thomas hesitated, his face pale and drawn. But then, as if realizing that silence would only make things worse, he spoke. "Greg Lawson," he muttered. "It's Greg Lawson's people. He must have sent someone to—" Before he could finish, a voice came from behind the door, deep and cold. "We know you're in there, Thomas. Open up." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. The tone of the voice was unmistakable, menacing, with a hint of control that chilled her to the bone. "Thomas?" Catherine said again, her voice quivering. "What do we do?" His eyes were wild with fear, panic threatening to overtake him. "We have to hide. If they find out you're here, they'll hurt you. I can't let them do that." The weight of his words hit Catherine like a ton of bricks. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the realization that everything he had been trying to protect her from was finally at the doorstep, literally. She didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing. She couldn't trust him anymore. She turned and walked toward the back of the house, her mind racing. She didn't know if she was being irrational or if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. But she needed space, time, to think, to figure out what to do next. As she moved through the kitchen, she heard the door creak open, and then the muffled sounds of voices, male, low, and commanding. Catherine's heart stopped for a moment as she realized that it wasn't just a simple conversation. There was tension in the air. She could hear the unmistakable rustling of feet against the wooden floor, the sound of hushed words, and the heavy silence that followed. Thomas was talking to them, trying to smooth things over, but Catherine knew better. These men didn't come to talk. They came for something. What was it? Was it money? Revenge? She barely managed to hold back her breath as she pressed herself against the wall listening. A few moments passed before she heard the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming. The voices quieted. Then the front door closed. Catherine's pulse raced. What had just happened? Was it over? Had they left? Or was it the calm before the storm? Suddenly her phone buzzed in her pocket. She nearly jumped out of her skin, pulling it out quickly. It was a message from Sarah. You can't hide forever. He's in too deep. Don't trust him, Catherine. It's all about survival now. He'll do whatever it takes to keep you in the dark. Catherine's mind spun. The cryptic message only added fuel to the fire. Sarah's warnings had been right all along. Thomas had been hiding so much more than she ever imagined, and now he was tangled in something dangerous, something that might cost them both their lives. A thought crossed her mind then. What if this was it? What if Thomas had reached the end of the road, and now there was no way out for either of them? Was she just an innocent bystander, someone caught in the crossfire of a game far bigger than she could ever have understood? Slowly, Catherine made her way back toward the front room, her footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. She peeked around the corner, trying to see what was happening. Her eyes locked onto Thomas as he stood near the door, his shoulders hunched in defeat. The look on his face made her stomach twist in knots. He had been lying to her for so long, hiding so much from her. She couldn't let herself be a part of this any longer. She had to make a choice. Before she could turn away, the door opened. A man stepped inside, tall and broad-shouldered, with a cruel glint in his eyes.